welcome back. It's so good to see you. So today we are going to be doing another true crime video. This story is, oh my gosh, it affected me greatly. Okay, this is going to be the story of the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. Now, I do want to mention up front that this is the most disturbing case I will probably ever cover, but I believe that it's important and deserves to be heard. Now, as usual, I did my research. I read articles, I watched documentaries, I watched YouTube videos. They even made movies about this case, which I had never heard of before. So I watched the movie, and I just found out that there's a second movie, so I may go and watch that movie as well. But after all the research, I took notes and everything like that, and I just couldn't get every detail in there the way that I wanted it. So I actually found an article that was written about it, and I said, you know what, this one includes every detail. It's missing a few details, which I will mention as I read it. I went ahead and just printed the article out, but it doesn't say who it's written by or anything like that. It's just documenting everything that happened based off of court cases and reports that were filed, that kind of thing. So I'm just gonna read it, and anything that it doesn't mention during the reading, I will add in myself. So yeah, this is an extremely disturbing case. But it's really an interesting but also terrible story. But like I said, I believe that it's important and deserves to be heard, because I don't know, it really affected me, and I thought that other people should know about it as well. Okay, so like I said, this is the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. Okay, Gertrude Benezuski, also known as Gertrude Wright, and the torture mother, was an Indiana divorcee who oversaw and facilitated the prolonged torture, mutilation, and eventual murder of Sylvia Likens, a teenage girl she had taken into her home. The case is unique in that while Gertrude did play an active role in Sylvia's death, the majority of the torture eventually brought about Sylvia's demise was carried out by Gertrude's teenage children and other neighborhood children. Although Gertrude did instruct the children on several occasions, it was later discovered that they took a large degree of Sylvia's torture into their own hands, into what would later be called a Lord of the Flies scenario come to life. When she was convicted of first-degree murder in 1965, the case was called the single worst crime perpetuated against an individual in Indiana's history. Gertrude was born Gertrude van Fossen in 1929, the third of 6 children. Little is known about her childhood, except that she shared an extremely close bond with her father and had a frigid relationship with her mother. A further wedge was driven between Gertrude and her mother when her father died in 1940. The 11-year-old watched her father die of a sudden heart attack. 5 years later, Gertrude dropped out of school at the age of 16 to marry 18-year-old Deputy John Benezuski, by whom she had 4 children. John had a volatile temper, often beating his wife for annoying him. The two stayed together for 10 years before eventually divorcing. Gertrude was granted custody of their children. Within a year of the divorce, Gertrude met and married a man named Edward Guthrie, who divorced her after 3 months when he tired of having her children around. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude and John Beniszewski reconciled and remarried. The couple stayed together for 7 years and had 2 more children before finally divorcing permanently in 1963. Around this time, the then 37-year-old Gertrude began an affair and moved in with a 23-year-old named Dennis Lee Wright, who further abused her. She became pregnant by him twice, suffering 1 miscarriage, possibly as a result of an assault on Wright, and giving birth to 1 child. This child, Dennis Jr., would be Gertrude's last child. In all, she had 7 children and suffered 6 miscarriages. Shortly after Dennis Jr.'s birth, Dennis Wright Sr. abandoned Gertrude and disappeared. She was left essentially destitute. As Wright had been supporting her financially, she was now forced to support herself and 7 children on occasional child support payments from the unreliable John Beniszewski, and by performing odd jobs around town such as babysitting and doing other people's laundry for them. Financial problems were quickly getting out of hand when Gertrude discovered that her 17-year-old daughter Paula was 3 months pregnant after a fling with a middle-aged married man. Around this time, Gertrude's health declined considerably. She was chronically ill with a number of unidentified illnesses, ceased practicing proper hygiene, and barely ate. Eventually, these factors began to affect her outward appearance, resulting in a receded hairline, sunken eyes, and an overall skeletal appearance. Gertrude began to present herself as Miss Wright, claiming that she had in fact married Dennis before he abandoned her, which allowed her to keep a reputation of respectability. In July 1965, Paula Beniszewski met up with a friend of hers, Darlene McGuire, who introduced her to 2 new neighborhood girls, Sylvia Likens, 16, and Sylvia's younger sister, Jenny, 15, who was required to walk with braces due to polio. Paula took the girls back home to 3850 East New York Street, where they drank soda and listened to records. The Likens girls' mother, Betty, was at the time in county jail after having been arrested for shoplifting, which left Sylvia to care for her sister. Betty had abandoned Sylvia's father, Lester, and effectively kidnapped their 2 daughters. When Paula heard of the girls' circumstances, she offered to let Sylvia and Jenny spend the night. The next day, Lester Likens arrived in town. After having tracked down his wife, he ran into McGuire, who recognized the description Lester gave of his daughters, and she directed him to Gertrude's house. When Lester Likens arrived, Gertrude introduced herself as Miss Wright. The 2 struck up a conversation, over the course of which the idea came up that Gertrude might take in Sylvia and Jenny as boarders. He had spoken with his wife at the county jail, where they had reconciled and agreed to travel the United States Carnival Circuit as carnies. No one knows whether Gertrude or Lester suggested that she board the girls. Eventually, Lester agreed to leave the children in Gertrude's care for $20 a week. Lester did not inspect the home before leaving. Had he done so, he would have discovered that Gertrude's home had no stove or microwave, that there was only enough beds for half the people in the house, that the only things Gertrude kept in her pantry were bread and crackers, that most of the surfaces in the home were caked with thick layers of dirt, and they had only enough plates and eating utensils for 3 people. The first week of Sylvia and Jenny's lives at Gertrude's home went relatively well. They attended high school and attended teenage social functions with the other children, as well as church with Gertrude on Sunday. When Lester's $20 payment failed to arrive, Gertrude threw a temper tantrum, screaming at the girls, "I took care of you two for nothing," before forcing them to lie across the bed with their skirts and underwear around their ankles while she spanked them with a leather belt. The $20 check came the next day. Shortly thereafter, Lester and Betty Likens came into town to check on the girls. Neither of them made any reference to the beatings, presumably under the threat of Gertrude. The next week, Sylvia and Jenny went through the neighborhood garbage collecting old Coca-Cola bottles to sell in order to get money for candy. When they came home with the candy, Gertrude accused them of stealing. When Sylvia explained how she had gotten the candy, Gertrude accused her of lying and made her bend over the bed as before while she beat her with a paddle. Shortly thereafter, the children came to their mother, Gertrude, after a church social and told her that they were disgusted with the amount of food they had seen Sylvia eating. Gertrude told Sylvia that she was angry that she would do something to ruin her physical appearance, and forced the girl to eat a hot dog piled with condiments. When Sylvia vomited, Gertrude forced her to scoop the vomit up and devour that as well. Soon afterwards, Lester and Betty Likens again came into town to check on the girls. Per Gertrude's instructions, Sylvia made no reference to the vomit eating incident. The incident, which appears to have triggered the sharp decline of Gertrude's mental stability, occurred in August of 1965, when she overheard Sylvia remark that she had once allowed a boy to feel her up. Gertrude burst into a fit of obscenities, accused Sylvia of being a prostitute, and informed the rest of the house that Sylvia was pregnant because she had let a boy touch her vagina. Gertrude then attacked Sylvia, repeatedly kicking her in the crotch. When Sylvia attempted to sit down afterwards, Paula threw her out of the chair and informed her, "You ain't fit to sit in chairs." From there on, Gertrude only allowed Sylvia to sit in a chair with permission. Around this time, Gertrude also began allowing her older children to use Sylvia as a sort of living plaything, with the games ranging from beatings to being pushed down the stairs. Why Sylvia's story so enraged Gertrude is still uncertain. It has been theorized that she saw in Sylvia the beauty and opportunity for happiness that had long ago escaped her, and so enraged and participated in Sylvia's torture as an act of self-loathing. Others have theorized that Gertrude's hard life and current living conditions resulted in a mental break. Still, others have theorized that the violence against Sylvia was an extreme form of domestic abuse, in which Gertrude directed her rage into Sylvia. Whatever the case, Gertrude manifested this rage by justifying her attacks by accusing Sylvia of being a prostitute and delivering bizarre sermons to her children and Sylvia about the filthiness of prostitutes and women in general. The day after Gertrude kicked Sylvia in the crotch, according to Jenny, as an act of vengeance, Sylvia and Jenny told their classmates that they had seen Paula and Stephanie, Gertrude's second oldest daughter, having sex with boys in exchange for money. When Sylvia's 15-year-old boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, discovered what Sylvia and Jenny had said, he came to Gertrude's home and beat Sylvia. From then on, Hubbard, encouraged by Gertrude, made frequent visits to the home, during which she would instruct the boy to practice his judo on Sylvia. Around this time, Gertrude got Sylvia's best friend, a 13-year-old named Anna Sisko, alone long enough to convince her that Sylvia had been telling boys at school that Anna's mother was a whore. When Gertrude took Anna to see Sylvia, she directed Anna in a violent attack on the girl. Soon after, Gertrude told one of Paula's friends, a girl named Judy Duke, that Sylvia had been spreading rumors about her mother and pitted the girls against each other in a fist fight. During the fight, Gertrude instructed Jenny to punch Sylvia. When Jenny refused, Gertrude began to beat her in the face with her fists until Jenny finally agreed to punch Sylvia. In August of 1965, the vacant house next door to Gertrude's residence was purchased by a middle-aged couple named Phyllis and Raymond Vermillion. Phyllis, seeing the number of children Gertrude cared for, believed that she would make a good babysitter for her 2 young children, and that she would also be helping Gertrude out by paying her for her services. The Vermillions arranged a backyard barbecue so that the 2 families could get to know one another. During the course of the barbecue, Phyllis noticed Sylvia wandering around the yard with a pronounced black eye. Paula proudly announced to Phyllis that she was the one who had given it to her. Then, under Gertrude's supervision, Paula approached Sylvia with a glass of hot water and threw it in Sylvia's face. Neither of the Vermillions reported this incident to the authorities. Sorry, that was my stomach. I'm hungry. 2 months later, Phyllis went to Gertrude's home to borrow something. Over the course of the few minutes she was there, she noticed Sylvia wandering around as in a daze with swollen lips and a black eye that had swollen shut. To demonstrate how this had happened, Paula took a belt off and began to beat Sylvia with it in front of Phyllis. Phyllis again neglected to report anything to the authorities. Like, what? Who wouldn't? Okay. Around the time that Phyllis Vermillion witnessed Paula beat Sylvia, Sylvia came home from school and told Gertrude that she needed a sweatsuit for gym class. When Gertrude told Sylvia that they could not afford one, Sylvia stole one from school. Gertrude questioned Sylvia about her new gym outfit, eventually coercing Sylvia into confession. Gertrude then transitioned from the topic of Sylvia stealing into the topic of Sylvia being a prostitute, and threw Sylvia onto the ground, where she repeatedly kicked her in the crotch, before once more returning to the topic of theft. To cure Sylvia of her sticky fingers, Gertrude burned the tips of each of Sylvia's fingers with a lit cigarette. Afterward, she made Sylvia bend over while she whipped her with a belt. After this incident, After this incident, the smokers in the home began arbitrarily putting their cigarettes out on Sylvia's body as a reminder for her not to steal. Sometime later, Sylvia went out again to sell old soda bottles for money. When she returned home, Gertrude accused her of prostitution. She then took her into the living room of her home and forced Sylvia to strip naked in front of her sons and several neighborhood boys, on threat of beating Jenny. Once Sylvia was fully naked, Gertrude handed her a glass Coca-Cola bottle and forced Sylvia to masturbate with it for the boys. Following the Coke bottle incident, Sylvia became incontinent. As a result, Gertrude decided that she was no longer fit to live with humans and locked her in the basement. The lack of a toilet in the basement forced Sylvia to defecate and urinate on the floor. When Gertrude saw this, she began a bathing regime to cleanse Sylvia, whom she began calling Dirty Girl. The regime consisted of filling Gertrude's claw-footed bathtub with scalding water, binding Sylvia's wrists and ankles, and then dunking Sylvia into it. The regime was administered sometimes once or many times a day. Following the baths, Paula would rub handfuls of salt over Sylvia's nude body. During this period, Gertrude took on 14-year-old Ricky Hobbs, a neighborhood boy, as her personal assistant. When dealing with Sylvia, Hobbs, an honor student from a middle-class family with no previous legal trouble, experienced a sudden shift in personality upon becoming Gertrude's assistant. Blindly following whatever orders she gave him, crime reporters have since speculated that Hobbs was Gertrude's lover and that she had seduced the boy into becoming her henchman. Gertrude's children turned Sylvia into a money-making opportunity, charging neighborhood children a nickel to gawk at the nude Sylvia or to push her down the stairs to the basement, where she was now kept when not being bathed or put on display. She was kept constantly naked and rarely fed. When she was allowed to eat, it was in some bizarre fashion, such as an instant in which Gertrude insisted she eat soup with her fingers. Often, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., would make Sylvia clean the basement by allowing her to eat her own feces, and gave Sylvia a container in which she could collect her urine, which she was then made to drink. Sometime around this period, Jenny managed to send contact to her and Sylvia's older sister, Diana, who was married and had a family of her own. Jenny outlined the horrors she and Sylvia were experiencing and instructed Diana to contact the police to come and rescue them. Diana ignored the letter, believing that Jenny was simply displeased with being punished and that she was making up stories so that she could come and live with her. Why couldn't she come and live with her? That's her older sister. She should be with family and not a stranger. I just think that's super messed up of her sister. Also, around this time, one of the neighborhood children who had been by to see Sylvia, a 12-year-old named Judy Duke, went home and told her mother they were beating and kicking Sylvia. The girl's mother replied, "That was what happened when someone was punished." What? I mean, this was 1965. I guess it was just okay to kick and punch people when they were punished? No, I don't think so. I can understand like getting a spanking or, like with a belt or something like that. But to kicking and punching and to just be okay with that, no. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude's Reverend Roy Gillian visited them as part of a program he set up to see. I think those are my kids. Visited them as part of a program he set up to see each of his parishioners at their homes. While he and Gertrude drank coffee, she complained to him that Sylvia had been an intense burden on her, claiming that the girl was a prostitute who had been servicing married men and had gotten pregnant. Although at the time Paula was several months pregnant, Gertrude insisted that her daughter was a virgin and that Sylvia was attempting to pass off her own misdeeds onto the pure Paula. Gertrude and the Reverend prayed for Sylvia's salvation before the Reverend left. When the Reverend returned again a few weeks later, Paula told the Reverend during prayers that she had hatred in her heart for Sylvia, to which Gertrude interjected that the opposite was true. Shortly after this, Diana came by to visit her sisters. Finally, Gertrude refused to allow her into the home, at first telling her that Lester had contacted her and instructed her not to allow Diana into the home. When Diana questioned this, Gertrude threatened to call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. Diana hid nearby the house until she spotted Jenny outside and then approached her. Jenny told her sister that she was not allowed to talk to her and then ran away. Like, what was Jenny threatened with? You know what I mean? I wish that they would have called the police, because then the police would have been able to search the house and see what was going on. Concerned, Diana contacted social services. When a social worker arrived at the home, Gertrude informed her that she had kicked Sylvia out of the house for being physically unclean and a prostitute, and that Sylvia had since run away. Gertrude then managed to get Jenny alone long enough to inform her that if she told the social worker the truth, Jenny would join her sister naked in the basement. Jenny then told the social worker that Sylvia had indeed run away. The social worker returned to her office, where she filed a report stating that no more calls needed to be made to the Benezuski home. Now, Jenny, she was 15, and I think she was just very young and innocent and was scared. She didn't want to join her sister. She didn't want to join her sister in the basement, but if she would have told the social worker what was really happening, she wouldn't have had to go down the basement. You know what I mean? Hold on a second. Sorry, my son needed help with something. Anyway, but yeah, like, if she would have just told the social worker what was actually happening, they would have rescued them, but she didn't know. She was just terrified about what was going on. But the fact that Diana didn't follow up, I bet after everything that happened, she just felt awful, Okay, so yeah, no more calls needed to be made to the Benezuski home. On October 20th, Gertrude called the police to come arrest a boy at her home. Robert Bruce Hanlon was a local youth who claimed that the Benezuski children had stolen things from his basement. He had come to the home earlier in the evening demanding that Gertrude return his things. When she refused, he attempted to sneak into the home to take them back. Phyllis Vermillion witnessed Hanlon being put into the back of a squad car and approached the police to speak on his behalf, as she had overheard the argument between Gertrude and Robert over the stolen goods. Vermillion made no mention of Sylvia during her conversation with the police. I don't like Phyllis. Like, I would have to say something. I'm sorry if you keep hearing my stomach. I'm just really hungry, but I don't want to stop. Okay. On October 21st, Gertrude instructed John Jr., Coy, Stephanie to bring Sylvia up from the basement and tie her to the bed, telling Sylvia that if she could hold her bladder through the night, she would be permitted to sleep upstairs again. When Gertrude checked Sylvia the next morning and discovered she wet the bed, Gertrude made her dress, then took her into the living room, where she was once again forced to perform a striptease for her sons and the neighborhood boys, again forcing Sylvia to masturbate with a Coca-Cola bottle. What was that about? I don't understand that. That's awful. When Sylvia was finished, she was allowed to dress. After a few moments, Gertrude brought up Sylvia's lies about Paula and Stephanie and declared, "You have branded my daughters, so I will brand you." Sylvia was forcibly stripped naked, tied down, and gagged, while one of Gertrude's children heated a sewing needle with a series of matches. When the needle was orange, Gertrude used it to carve and burn the letter I and part of the letter M onto Sylvia's stomach. She then instructed Ricky Hobbs to continue carving letters to spell out the phrase, "I am a prostitute and proud of it." At one point, Hobbs stopped and asked Gertrude in a confused manner to spell prostitute for him. Gertrude wrote it down on a piece of paper, and the carving/burning recommenced. When the process was finished, the tattoo, consisting not only of the actual carving, but third-degree burns left behind by the heat of the needle, was such that modern plastic surgery would have been unable to correct it. Satisfied, Gertrude left the room, leaving Sylvia tied, gagged, and naked. At this point, Ricky, Paula, and Gertrude's 10-year-old daughter Shirley decided to give Sylvia another tattoo, an S in the middle of her chest. The three would later become confused as to whether they had intended the S to stand for Sylvia or slave, though the latter explained the latter explanation was the one which was leaned towards as being correct. Ricky burned the bottom curve of the S into Sylvia. He then either choked or changed his mind, because he then ordered Jenny to come over and carve the top half. Although threatened, Jenny refused. I would too. I wouldn't be able to do that to my own sister. Ricky relented and ordered Shirley to finish the tattoo. The 11-year-old accidentally carved the curve backwards so that the number 3 appeared on Sylvia's chest. Gertrude re-entered the room at this time to address the still bound and gagged Sylvia, saying, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? You can't get married now. You can't undress in front of anyone. What are you going to do now?" Sylvia was ungagged to address Gertrude. She replied, "I guess there's nothing I can do. It's on there." Hubbard then took Sylvia back to the basement, where he used her for judo practice for a period before returning home. In the middle of the night, Jenny Likens sneaked into the basement to visit her sister, where Sylvia told her, "I'm going to die, I can tell." Shortly after Jenny's visit, Gertrude went into the basement and brought Sylvia upstairs and allowed her to sleep in one of the beds. She was allowed to sleep until noon the next day. October 23rd, when Gertrude woke her. Once Sylvia was awake, Gertrude and Stephanie took her into the bathroom and gave her a warm, soapy bath. After that bath, Gertrude and Paula dressed Sylvia and then dictated a letter for her, intended to look like a runaway letter to her parents. For reasons unknown, Gertrude dictated that Sylvia opened the letter with, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Likens." The words which Gertrude dictated were, "I went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I would give them something. So I got in the car, and they all got what they wanted. And when they got finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body. And they also put on my stomach, 'I am a prostitute and proud of it.' I have done just about everything that I can do to make Gertie mad and cause Gertie more money than she's got. I've tore up the new mattress and peed on it. I have also cost Gertie doctor bills that she really can't pay and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all her kids." Just as strangely as Gertrude's insistence on the formal salutation, she insisted Sylvia not sign it. After Sylvia finished the letter, Gertrude began formulating a plan to have John Jr. and Jenny take Sylvia to a nearby garbage dump and leave her there to die. When Sylvia overheard this, she ran for the front door, but in her emaciated and mutilated state, moved so slowly that Gertrude was able to grab her just as she reached the front door and drag her back into the house. Once Gertrude settled Sylvia down, she took her into the kitchen and made her some toast. Sylvia attempted to eat it, but then said she couldn't swallow. Gertrude took down the curtain rod in the kitchen and beat Sylvia in the mouth with it. John then took Sylvia into the basement and tied her up while Gertrude prepared a plate of crackers for Sylvia. She then offered the crackers to Sylvia. Sylvia replied, "Feed it to the dog, it's hungrier than I am." Gertrude repeatedly punched Sylvia in the stomach before leaving her in the basement. On the next day, October 24th, Gertrude came into the basement and attempted to bludgeon Sylvia. First, she tried to hit her with a chair, but missed and broke it against a wall. Next, she tried to beat her over the head with a paddle, but swung in such a wide arc that it came back against her own face, blacking her eye. To stop the strange show, Hubbard stepped in and beat Sylvia unconscious with a broomstick. Over the course of that night and into the morning hours of October 25th, Sylvia beat the basement floor with a scoop portion of an iron shovel. Next-door neighbors would later report considering calling the police, but chose not to. I bet they feel awful. But, I would probably do the same thing. If I heard weird banging or something like that, I would just be like, what the hell is that noise? I wish that would stop. You know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't think anything negatively about it. I don't know what I would think that it was, but if I heard something like that, I'd be like, God, what are they doing over there? Like, I would think that they were doing some kind of like construction work or weird art. I don't know. I wouldn't think that there was a girl being beaten in the basement. You know what I mean? Like, but then later, I would just feel awful. On October 26th, Gertrude voiced her intentions to give Sylvia a warm bath, which was odd. Stephanie and Ricky brought Sylvia upstairs and laid her in the tub fully clothed. They took her out shortly thereafter. Then they realized Sylvia was not breathing. Stephanie gave Sylvia CPR, but by this time Sylvia was already dead. Gertrude instructed her children to take Sylvia's body to the basement and strip it naked. She then told Hobbs to go to a nearby payphone and call the police, her house having no working telephone. When the police arrived, Gertrude gave them the letter she'd made Sylvia dictate. In the midst of the commotion, Jenny Likens whispered to one of the police, "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." This statement, combined with the police's discovery of Sylvia's body in the basement, prompted the officers to arrest Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, John, Hobbs, and Hubbard for murder. Other neighborhood children present at the time, Mike Monroe, Randy Lepper, Duke, and Cisco, were arrested for injury to a person. Gertrude, her children, Hobbs, and Hubbard were held without bail, pending their trials. Charges against Cisco, Duke, Monroe, and Lepper were dismissed. Stephanie's lawyer got her a separate trial. Before it was able to begin, the district attorney dropped the murder charges. Meanwhile, an autopsy of Sylvia Likens turned up over 100 cigarette burns on her body. In addition to various second and third degree burns, severe bruising, and muscle and nerve damage. In her death throes, Sylvia bit through her lips, nearly severing each of them. Her vaginal cavity was nearly swollen shut, although an examination of the canal determined that her hymen was still intact, largely discrediting, along with the lack of any ripping or tearing of the rectum. It was largely discrediting Gertrude's assertion that Sylvia was a prostitute and completely dissolving her insistence that she was pregnant. The official cause of death was brain swelling, internal hemorrhaging of the brain, and shock. Basically torture. The case of the state of Indiana versus Gertrude Benezuski, John Benezuski, Paulo Benezuski, Ricky Hobbs, and Coy Hubbard commenced in May of 1966. The prosecution sought the death penalty for all involved, including John and Hobbs, who were 13 and 14 at the time. Paula's time in court was interrupted when she was rushed to the hospital to give birth to the child she and her mother had insisted she wasn't carrying. In a show of solidarity, Paula named the child Gertrude. Gertrude and the children's cases were made worse by the fact that they were being represented by 4 different attorneys, one for Gertrude, one for Paula, one for Hobbs, and one for Coy and John, all whom worked against each other and attempted to shift blame against the other defendants, even though they were all being tried together. Gertrude's attorney attempted to shift blame onto the children, portraying her as weak, chronically ill, and incapable of preventing or perpetuating any of the abuse. The children's attorneys attempted to shift blame to Gertrude and the other children. Some of the most damaging testimony against Gertrude was due to her own self-incrimination. She recounted bizarre tales of Sylvia Likens being a neighborhood prostitute and of her trysts with middle-aged married men. It's like, was she talking about her own daughter? My gosh. As well as accusing her of frequently starting fights in the home. To corroborate Gertrude's testimony, 11-year-old Marie was called to the stand. Initially, Marie backed up everything her mother said until during cross-examination she suddenly screamed, "God, help me," before admitting everything she said was a lie, and went on to recount in graphic, blunt detail how her mother and siblings had tortured and murdered Sylvia. The young girl's shocking turn against her own family was largely responsible for the eventual verdict. Gertrude was found guilty of murder in the first degree. To the shock of the citizens of Indianapolis, she did not receive the death penalty, but rather life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. I think that's a better punishment anyway. Paula was convicted of second-degree murder. She appealed and was granted a new trial, but before it began, she struck a plea bargain and pled guilty of voluntary manslaughter. She served 3 years in prison and was then paroled. What? That's messed up. John, Hubbard, and Hobbs were each convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile detention facility. I mean, they were children, but like, by the time the now 17-year-old Hobbs was released, the severity of his crimes had sunk in, and he suffered a nervous breakdown. He began a regime of heavy chain smoking, which had severely decayed his lungs by the time he was 20. By the time he was 21, he was dead of lung cancer. Ugh. I mean, he deserved that kind of death, though, like, for what he did. Just, ugh. Gertrude appealed, was granted a new trial, and was again found guilty, though this time she was sentenced to 18 years to life. What? Over the course of the next 18 years, Gertrude became a model prisoner, working in the sewing shop and becoming a den mother to younger female inmates. By the time she came up for parole in 1985, she had earned the prison nickname Mom. The news of Gertrude's parole hearing sent shockwaves through the Indiana community. Jenny Likens and her family appeared on television to speak out against Gertrude. The members of 2 anti-crime groups, Protect the Innocent and Society's League Against Molestation, traveled to Indiana to oppose Gertrude's parole and support the Likens family, beginning a sidewalk picket campaign. Over the course of 2 months, the groups collected 4,500 signatures from the citizens of Indiana demanding that Gertrude be kept behind bars. In spite of all this, Gertrude was granted parole. What? During the hearing, she gave the following confession. I am not sure what role I had in it, because I was on drugs. I never really knew her. I take full responsibility for whatever happened. What? She knew what was happening. I don't care if you're on drugs. Like, no, that's not okay. Gertrude walked out of prison on December 4th, 1985, and traveled to Iowa under the name Nadine Van Fossen. She died there of lung cancer in 1990. The fates of Gertrude's children remained largely unknown. Paula moved to Iowa and assumed a new identity. Internet rumors claim that she is still alive and lives on a farm somewhere in the Iowa countryside. Stephanie became a school teacher and assumed a new name. But I did hear that this when the movie came out, previously she had not changed her name, and when the movie came out, they were like, oh my god, and realized who she was because she did not put any of that stuff on her resume, obviously. But I believe they fired her, and then she had to move and change her name. John changed his name to John Blake and worked as a truck driver before becoming a real estate agent and lay minister. He was never arrested again. He married and had 3 children, only surfacing briefly in 1998 in the wake of the Jonesboro massacre to speak for the first time about Sylvia's murder, saying that he took full responsibility for his role in the murder and that a harsher sentence would have been more just. Yes, it would have. I've got like some personal notes just of me ranting. Okay, so Gertrude beat them because the $20 payment was late, but it came the very next day. I'm like, if it would have been there on time, would none of this have happened? Would she have not just, became so violent? What if the money would have kept coming? I mean, the money did keep coming, but if it was always on time and stuff, would that seal have not been broken? You know what I mean? I don't know. And then Phyllis, the neighbor, I don't like her. And I hope that she felt terrible for the rest of her life. Her husband, too. I can't remember her husband's name, but the husband is just as guilty. He was there. He saw that. And then the sister, Diana, not believing the letter. That was messed up. But she did call social services and stuff. But I just feel like I would have followed up. You know what I mean? Like, I would have. I feel like if I felt that something was wrong, I would have tried to do more. I'd have been like, you know what? They're my sisters. Let them come and live with me. I mean, she was a stranger. Gertrude was a stranger being paid to board these girls. Like, awful. Okay, and then what was Gertrude's obsession with prostitutes? Like, what? I just don't understand, and I don't know. But the part about how, okay, yeah, I have a note here about on October 26th, Gertrude voiced her intentions to give Sylvia a warm bath. I'm like, I think over the night when she was beating the basement floor with the shovel, I think that she died, and that that Gertrude went down there and she was like, oh God, she's dead. Because it says that Stephanie and Ricky brought Sylvia upstairs and laid her in the tub fully clothed. Why would they put her in the tub fully clothed? I'm thinking that she was dead and they were like, we're gonna have to report this. So her body was cold and they were like, just leave her clothes on, put her in a super hot bath to warm her body up. You know what I mean? That way when they did call the cops, they would be like, we didn't know, we just found her, because her body was still warm. You know what I mean? I don't know. Ugh. The whole story just makes me so upset and just sick. And then what makes me the most angry is Sylvia and Ginny's parents. Like, those have got to be just some crap parents, because who just leaves their children? Like, I understand that if you need to have a specific job or whatever, you have kids though, take them with you. Get a job at a grocery store, at a fast food place. Yeah, fast food places existed in 1965. Like, if it was your dream to be a carny, great, take them with you though. They were 15 and 16. They were allowed to have jobs back then. I mean, sometimes they took their boys. They had 5 kids in all, and sometimes they allowed their boys to go. Why? And the boys, there was a younger boy and an older boy. They were actually with their grandparents. Why didn't they have their daughters be with their grandparents? Like, I don't understand. I just think that they were crap parents. Okay, and then, yeah, they were crap parents, because afterwards, after the whole trial and everything like that, her parents just left. So Ginny was actually adopted by the state's, the district attorney. Like, I don't know if he felt bad for her and like what, but the district attorney adopted her and, helped her recover and move on. And her parents were just like, yeah, okay, bye. And then continued on with their carny lives. What? Oh, it makes me so mad. But I do want to say that Sylvia Likens is, yes, she was the victim in this, but she was so strong. And she was a 16-year-old girl, like, to be 16-year-old 16 years old and have to go through something like that, I don't know. She was so strong, but I believe that there was nothing as strong as the love she had for her sister, because everything that she went through, everything that she endured, she did it so that it wouldn't happen to her sister. You know, like, that is love. I don't know. It's got to be hard to be Jenny. You know what I mean? To have to see that happening to her sister and being so scared and not knowing what to do or how to help her. And I don't know. It's just awful, awful, awful story. But I do recommend seeing the movies. I haven't seen the second movie. The movies are called An American Crime and The Girl Next Door. Now, The Girl Next Door, they changed the names and like some of the events, but An American Crime keeps with the story, like everything. They keep the names, they keep the events that happen. Now, they don't show all of the things that happen, but it does show a lot. And I know the story sounds so unbelievable. Like, how could this happen? How could this even? How did it get to this point and stuff like that? But after watching the movie, which was really hard to watch, after watching the movie, I can see how it happened. It made it so believable, and the acting was just great. When I started watching the movie, I was like, what? Because Sylvia was played by Elliot Page before his transition, and he's just such a great actress in this movie. At the time, he was an actress, but just the acting talent is great. But yeah, so it had Elliot Page when he was Ellen Page, and then one of the actors is, oh god, who is it? I can't think of his name now. I can't think of his name. It's going to drive me nuts. But it has James Franco in it, and it has Chris Pratt, and gosh, I cannot think of his name, but he's in American Horror Story. He plays Tate. That was like his original role in American Horror Story. God, it's gonna drive me crazy what his name is. But he's a really good actor, and literally any movie that this guy has ever been in, it's great. And as soon as I saw him, I didn't even know it was him because he was like a child. But all of these actors were in this movie, and I was like, I've never even heard of this movie. It came out in 2007, and both movies actually came out in 2007. But I don't know if it was like an independent film or what. But I went and looked it up. Like, the movie was so intense and made the actual story come to life so much for me that after I was done reading it, I was like doing things around the house, and then I just literally broke down, and I was coming downstairs and my kids were downstairs. I broke down and I started crying, and I just cried on the stairs for a while. I didn't want my kids to see me cry, but like I had to stop where I was and just cry. It was just so awful. But to see the story be put to life like that, and their acting skills, it's like, oh, it was hard to watch the movie. I can't imagine what it was actually like. Obviously for Sylvia, but for Jenny to go through something like that, I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry this video was like super long, but I didn't want to leave any detail out of that story because it was just, you needed to hear everything, you know what I mean? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, I hope that you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.